All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me, Allison. I'm happy to come here and discuss some of the legislation that has taken place this past year. I think I want to just start with kind of setting the tone for um, really what has happened this past session and how we move forward. I think it's important to realize that there were literally thousands of bills introduced this past legislative session. And so no one, I think it's not possible for anyone to really know everything that happened, everything that passed. And so what I did was kind of pulled some of the most, I would argue, key education policy bills that impact schools directly so that you can dive deeper. And so while I'm not going to give you in-depth bill analysis on each bill, I'm going to give you high-level insights on the bills so that you can dive deeper and kind of pinpoint areas that you want to look for your schools. And that's what we did here at IPS, right? So presented the same content to our leadership so that they can kind of identify areas that they need more information on. So there might be some bills that it's really high level. Um, and if you want more information or you have questions, always happy to dig deeper for you. But let's get started. So on the I think most positive note, we had, oh, sorry, would help if I knew how to click next slide. We had House Bill 1499. And so this was a collaborative effort with our partners at Enlace, focused on really adjusting for Senate Bill 1 that took place the year prior. And so think of House Bill 1499 as a overall correction. And I don't say correction in a negative way, but just adjustment in how can schools better implement Senate Bill 1, the literacy bill, so that they're inclusive of their schools and also not burdened by the mandates that were put in place with Senate Bill 1. And so House Bill 1499 looked at Senate Bill 1 and it just added some adjustments. The first is the summer iRead retakes. And so that was not necessarily something that a lot of people realized that you were only allowed to offer iRead retakes once. Now you can do it twice in the summer to, again, try to catch some of those students who might be on the cusp when it comes to retention. And then most importantly, I think put in place a support for multilingual learners with schools with 50% third grade ELL population are eligible for iRead, or they're eligible for good cause exemptions. And so those are just things that, again, in the Senate Bill 1, where you're adjusting for literacy, well, the it was a big swing, right? It was a really big change and adjustments. The reality as school leaders is how do you implement? And so House Bill 1499 puts some flexibility in place for school leaders to adjust to their student populations. And so there's a second slide on this because it has a lot of changes. And so one thing that we were thinking about, and I'll just talk through as a district, so it kind of helps you think about your schools, was one, of course, getting to retake windows in place, and then also thinking about how we are collecting and ensuring that our data is up to date for our students, because currently there's no clarity on how the good cause exemptions will be required when it comes to that student data. And so having your data ready so that you can prepare to engage with IDOE when it comes to making sure that students aren't punitive for um, their iRead scores. And so we are excited about this change within IPS. We're seeing hundreds of students that will not be retained due to the changes in House Bill 1499. And so again, I do think that thankful to the advocacy of Enlace and other key partners who really advocated to say, we of course prioritize literacy. This is important, but in order to implement these hefty goals from Senate Bill 1, we need some adjustments to do it better. And so the legislators were very receptive to those changes. And, you know, in some ways, this bill kind of just flew through the process with not any pushback or opposition. And that's always really nice to see. And so uh, that's House Bill 1499. And another big bill that was in the headlines a lot that I won't dive too much into, but I do think it's important if you are in the Indianapolis landscape to know that House Bill 1515 includes the Indianapolis Local Education Alliance. And this is very unique to the country. This is legislated through the state that identifies Indianapolis as such a unique landscape that it needs to kind of step back and do a citywide facilities and transportation assessment, meaning given the governance structures within our city with choice, we need to have a better plan for how we use resources. So this is a group that's led by the mayor of Indianapolis, and it's separate from the district. However, our superintendent sits on it and has appointees, and they have to submit a plan by December 31st that dives into what does the future of Indianapolis looks like when it comes to resource sharing and sustainability. And so in like the most simplest headline, we have 42,000 students who attend 42,000 public education students and one pot of money, let's say. How do we ensure that this pot of money is serving all of those 42,000 students in the best way possible? And that's simplifying it, but I do think it's a good way to think about what is this group really tasked with doing. And the mayor has announced the appointees. So that's public information, and they will be having their first public meeting before July 1. Next one is not, don't have to get too in the weeds in it, but it's advanced math enrollment. So this requires automatic enrollment for qualified students into advanced math and establishes math intervention mandates. Just speaking as independently, Rachel, we like to have mandates in our state. And the reality is, when you're a school leader, that's a lot, right? So the implications of this, I don't think are a surprise to any of you. It adds pressure to scheduling, staffing, your course offerings. You need to think about, are you equipped to expand these math supports and programming? Unfortunately, we like mandates without resources tied to them, just speaking very honestly. And so this will just be something to kind of look out for to ensure that you have the ability to meet these mandates. Going to the next, for House Bill 1498 is accountability and diploma reform. And so this one really looks at the A to F grading methodology. And so one thing that I wanted to highlight about this 1498 is that they will be putting out some sort of document in December 31st that informs this new evaluation process. And so, looking at the past legislative session, we had all these bills that went through, but there are a lot of dates that we need to be looking for, and they all typically are December 31st of reports coming out. And so, as you might remember, 2 sessions ago, there was a transportation report that was supposed to come out. It came out of IDOE. That typically leads to legislative recommendations for the following session. So whatever we see come out of this House Bill 1498, we might see a bill introduced in 2026 that changes the A to F accountability system. And so just important to note, this can change the way schools are evaluated. This can change graduation pathways. And so just if I'm an educator, I'm looking for that document coming December 31st when it comes to that. Then we have the Indiana Literacy Cadre participation. So this bill mandates participation for schools with 70% lower iRead proficiency. And then it also directs IDOE to create and publish a list of high quality English language arts curriculums for schools to use. It targets schools that are in need to adopt state literacy strategies. And so one thing that I told our team that might apply to this group is when I'm reading these bills, you're probably doing 98% of the things that are added to this past legislative session. But it is important to highlight, just in case you maybe didn't know, that they're going to be putting out this list of curriculum or items that will be coming out of IDOE to watch for. And so that's Senate Bill 358. There is funding tied to this bill. So the Indiana Literacy Cadre, as I believe multiple people probably on this call know, has received funding. And so not as much of a mandate as like the math requirement. So this is another big bill, the House Bill 102. This was a deregulation bill. And so there were a lot of things jammed into this bill to eliminate and update outdated systems, right? It streamlines education codes by repealing programs, kind of taking away some redundant code that we didn't need as a state. But there's also some changes that I think are relevant to this group. So changes in charter governance. So charter organizers should review and update your authorizer policies. So just make sure that you're up to date with however your authorizer has their frameworks. And then also there will be discipline reform. So new state-led guidance on student behavior and strategies that could help improve your climate and reduce suspensions. And so to dive deeper into this bill, just because it was so big and so many pages, some of the key changes that school leaders should know is it removes inactive programs. It simplifies charter school requirements, including economic interest statements and performance target rules. It reduces compliance burdens by repealing duplicate training and reporting and planning mandates. It shifts authority and governance structures, including adult high schools, to be excluded from graduation rate calculations. And it directs the Department of Education to publish best practices for classroom behavior management and reduces student discipline. And so if I'm a school leader, I'm thinking about, are these policies and reports or training requirements relevant to my school? Is there something that I need to ensure that I'm being compliant with, or maybe there's something that I no longer have to do due to this bill? So just thinking about if we need to update board policies or procedures. And so again, that bill was solely focused on deregulation. The next bill, Senate Bill 255, is a little bit straightforward. It allows STEM professionals with degrees but limited coursework to receive teaching licenses. And so this is an effort, as we've seen in the past from our state, to encourage more people to leave one sector to enter into education, and just allowing for more pathways to that. And so thinking about how to train those individuals who might come from non-traditional backgrounds is something that I would be thinking about as a school leader. It's also an opportunity to bring in more diversity and talent into your school buildings. Another relevant bill would be the sex education changes. And so this is a mandate that has to do with sex education. It's not grade specific, but it does say school age children throughout the bill several times. And it's really a curriculum overhaul to current sex education content, revised so that there's a new video for the fetal development, as well as emphasizes consent. It also focuses a lot on what you can teach in sex ed. So if this is something, if you are a school leader, maybe in the middle school age or 5 through 8, definitely would dive into Senate Bill 442. Just making sure that you're compliant with the current human sexuality lessons, and making sure that it's age appropriate. It is hard, just speaking honestly. Age appropriate, it doesn't have a real definition there, right? And so you as leaders have to determine that. But I would assume that's probably 5th grade through 8th grade when it comes to the content. The next one is minimum teacher salary. So establishes $45,000 as the statewide minimum teacher salary. I know a lot of advocates wanted this to be higher. but this is a win. It also directs that IDOE conduct a feasibility study that's due November 1st on whether school employees could opt into the state health plans, and how those savings could be used. The implications require salary structure reviews, right? So ensuring that everyone's compliant with those salary structure. And while there's no immediate impact from the IDOE feasibility study, it could lead to future changes in benefits, such as maternity leave, all of the things that you think about when it comes to the benefits and opting into the state's program. So questions, are we compliant, and how do we address any issues with meeting the threshold? Okay, continuing on the conversation of money, Senate Bill 249 permits supplemental payouts, pay outside of collective bargaining, and so adds an opportunity for performance-based recruitment stipends. I think this is kind of in line with the STEM bill, allowing for like more non-traditional backgrounds as well, just looking to address some of the teacher and educator shortages we're seeing in our state. Senate Bill 289, you might have heard this bill as the anti-DEI bill, and this looks at employee training and prohibits employee training that links morality to personal characteristics or assigns blame. And so just thinking about how do you vet content while upholding equity commitments. And so something that as a district we're talking about, like, equity is embedded in pretty much everything that we do when it comes to our HR policies. And so thinking about how do we ensure that we're still meeting our commitments, and also meeting the restrictions of the legislation. So kind of combing through language, being really intentional with our general counsel to ensure that we are compliant with these changes. On the moving forward on money, but not in a, I would say, not the most positive way. Summer school funding shift, so moves per student summer school funding model, so requires programming and budget reconfiguration. Really thinking about how do you maximize the impact under the new funding rules for summer school funding shifts. I do believe, not to get too editorial, but it's it's hard to see Senate Bill 373 that focuses on the summer school funding shift, knowing all that we have to do to fully implement 2003's Senate Bill 1, focus on literacy, that mandate summer school for our third graders who are not at reading level. And so I do find these bills kind of contradicting to one another. However, it is important to be aware that there are these shifts made in summer school funding. The next is parental oversight and civil enforcement. And so I know I jammed a lot on this slide, but I think the headline for this is it expands parental rights and allows legal action against schools. It allows parents to file civil lawsuits against schools or districts if they believe their rights have been burdened without compelling government interests. It might be a little editorial. What's important to know is that it does raise compliance and risk for districts and schools. And so things that you would want to be thinking about is, does your current policies allow for risk restricting parental access to student information? Are you documenting all parent communication and clearly and consistently? Are counselors and student support staff trained on the legal limits of confidentiality with minors? Do our curriculum approval and health services consent procedures clearly respect and reinforce parental rights? And what systems are in place to ensure that we do not substantially burden a parent's role intentionally or not? And so the headline from this is schools will be more at risk of lawsuits, just because the language is pretty vague in really laying out any guardrails for parents and their ability to sue. So, yeah, again, not to get too editorial, but I don't think that this is the most productive legislation for our schools and students and families, but it is something that, when I think about who does this hurt, I think, smaller schools that might not have resources, um, to have general counsel or an attorney, on call all the time. And so it's definitely something that if you get ahead in your policies, you can help reduce the risk for the implementation of this bill. And that's my last bill.
Okay, thank you. Please go ahead and give us questions in the chat, or if you want to come off mute and ask questions, can have Rachel go back to any of her previous slides about specific questions about specific bills.
I did do my best to kind of go in and add as much content to the slide as possible so that you can share it out and use it as a resource. Again, one thing that we're thinking about at IPS is just we can't be experts in all of these areas, but having a high level insight into these big changes so that you can notify those who maybe are in HR or front office. Like everyone's impacted in different ways with all that has been passed this legislative session. And so, one thing I did for my team was try to highlight for each area. This would impact HR, this would impact operations, just so that you don't feel so overwhelmed when looking at all of the changes.
Yeah, Katrina, so can you go back to HB 1002?
That's a big one. So that's the deregulation bill. There's two slides for it. This is the key changes and probably the most relevant. The other one just talks about how it's focused on deregulating.
Katrina, let us know if there's specific questions about this one.
This is one that I would recommend everyone to kind of dive into. It's definitely not light reading because it's very long. Even the digest itself, the overview of the bill is extremely long. Um, but there are just so many different things mentioned in it.
Okay, are there other questions or other bills that you want us to go back to? Is everybody clear on if their schools are going to, if you go back to 1499, if your schools are going to qualify for exemption for your multilingual learners, for iRead, and how that's going to work? Okay, I'm not hearing any questions. So I think that must mean that you were very clear with with everything that you went over with us today. We really, really, really appreciate it. Okay, so if you guys could take a minute and fill out our survey for us before you hop off, and also if any other questions are popping up while we're kind of just hanging out, let us know. Feel free to ask questions, and please fill out our survey. We will
I'm
hang
happy
out.
to connect further with anyone. Allison, please share my contact out. Again, I think some of the biggest headlines from this session, I know that there was so much focus on funding, and that's incredibly important, but there's a lot of these like technical changes um, that I do think people need to be mindful of just because it's hard to know, if you're compliant with all of the bills that were passed. And so tried to do my best to highlight those areas.
Yeah, we appreciate that. Thank you. I think that hopefully we can really blast this out so school leaders can listen and review this summer. And if anyone here has a school leader that you want to share this with, we will make sure that we get it to you so that you can share it with your school leaders.